And this is a great way to think about it. And I'm going to say something contentious here. Mary is the mother of God. Okay, for Catholics, it's probably not contentious at all. Now what I'm using there is nuanced thinking. So if I say Mary pre-existed God, heresy, false. If I say Mary gave birth to Jesus, true. Jesus is God, true. Mary's the mother of God, just follows out logically. Important thing there is nuanced thinking. Okay. Bitcoin requires nuanced thinking. You'll see that, and I'm kind of retentive. I do this, I finger quotes a lot, because we have to use a vernacular and language that we're more familiar with to describe something we're less familiar with. So again, make sure you're using nuanced thinking here. Like, so if I say address, that might mean something different to all of you. Good to know what I mean. I can't go into full details, unfortunately. So what I've tried to put together for the presentation is I'm trying to be super faithful with my language, so you can use this as a source of truth. Like I said, I might have misspoke here and there, so do your own research, but strive to discover what I'm saying. It's really tough to understand something that's three-dimensional using only two-dimensional language. And like if you, okay, sorry to get into the art world, but if you want to draw a human figure, best way to do it, to be able to really rock drawing a human person, is to do live figure sketching. Because if all you're doing is looking at photos, you can kind of get an understanding of what's going on in 3 dimensions, but to really have it click, it's best to see that thing in 3 dimensions. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at Bitcoin from another perspective. So we looked at it from one perspective, now we're going to use an analogy that hopefully helps it make sense. My hope is that everything here helps things make sense. So I call this the Blocktrain. Hopefully we're all familiar with trains. My son, I guess you could say, I have a train set at home. My son's 3.5, but who really plays with it? So the Blocktrain, this is going to be an analogy of how Bitcoin works. And we're going to kind of look at it in reverse order to how we looked at it before. So what we're going to do is, we're first going to look at how is a transaction added to the chain. Then we're going to look at how are these transactions actually affected. There we go. All right, so imagine a train. Shouldn't be too hard. I've included a beautiful picture to you. This is not sponsored by Brio. You also see Lego. They are not sponsors. I wash my hands of any connections you make or any endorsements. Okay, so a train, a series of cars, single series of cars being loaded one after another behind a locomotive. That makes sense, Kevin. Good. Then we're going to say that on average, every 10 minutes another car is added to the train. Hopefully that makes sense. That's how the cars get on the train. It's not just magic, they don't just fall from the sky. Who puts these trains together? Well, teams put these cars together. They load up all the cargo, they send them on their way. But in this analogy, it's unique, has to be, obviously for Bitcoin. What they're doing is these teams are offering up their car to be added to the train. But how many cars effectively are added to the train at a time? Just one. So they're in a contest. Each team is in a contest to have their car added to the train. It's not clear. I'll make it clear, and we'll pull back the curtain some more later too. These teams, we're going to call them miners. Bitcoin has mining nodes. Again, those are the ones who, in addition to doing all the other stuff for running the currency, they are the ones who actually construct the ledger. So in our train analogy, we're going to call them the same thing. We're going to call them miners. There's our miner there. This is the P side available. I didn't have a really good miner, so use your imagination. Okay. Excellent. So what do they do? Good to know. So what they do is they put together the train cars in our analogy. We'll just call them teams. The teams put together the train car, they construct it, load it up, spiff it, put in some cool seats, what have you. And that's fairly simple to do for them. And then they also load up the cargo. and then they send the train on its way to hopefully be added to the train. So the teams load up the cars, they put the cargo on, they send it on its way. Now, what do they compete for? Because I said they're in a contest. Well, they compete for two things. They get remunerated for two things. One is a per car lottery reward. So all I mean there is if your car gets added to the train, stop. Okay, I can't do it. If that's any of you, there we go. No? Great. We're going to power through. So they get compensated per car that gets added. So there's a preset reward they get.
Right now, how many Bitcoin is that?
We're going to say they get 6.25. We're not talking about Bitcoin, but they get 6.25 money for their reward at present. It's per car. Then they also collect fees for the cargo. So you can think of it like all these people on the platform, they're like, put my cargo on. They go, sure thing. So they're collecting fees, and they're collecting a per car reward. Hopefully that makes sense so far. But they only get the reward if their car is chosen. They only get the reward if they win that contest. And this is something which I'm going to step out of character just for a moment and just say, people typically trivialize this part of Bitcoin to their detriment. If you don't understand why it's a contest, I would say we can do follow-up material or look deeper. I don't mean like you need to come to another talk. I just mean I've got stuff that explores it. But there's very important reasons why they do this contest. So who decides who gets to add to the train and get rewarded? It's a lottery. And what's a lottery? Well, a lottery is a game of chance where there's only one winner, and you can maybe increase your odds by buying more tickets, but it's not predetermined. There's not really a way to rig it other than buying more tickets to win the lottery. That's a lottery, game of chance. That's not deterministic. So it's possible that I buy one ticket in a lottery and Susie Q, sorry for using Susan all the time, but I pick on Susie here. So Susie buys 1 million tickets and I win. Take that, Susie. Who's more likely to win? Susie. Who is determined to win? Neither of us. But Susie made more of an effort. She's more likely to win. I could still win, but it's not likely. So think game of chance. All we need to hang our hat on right now is the way a car is decided to be added to the train is by lottery. And what is that lottery? What is the way you bid? It's a guessing game. Should look familiar. Where you have to guess numbers. Sorry, for those of you who are just watching the presentation, I could read to you. It says 1 no, 2 no, 3 no. And then maybe it's some other number, really big one, and that works. So I go, yeah, that's good enough. We'll take that one. Right now, it's all you need to know, which is the lottery is a guessing game. How do you increase your chances of winning? Be able to guess more. But it's a guessing game. And we'll look at how that works. And then the number you supply or you win on has to fall within an acceptable range. So it'd be way too hard if you had to guess in a particular number, and it's a really big number. So what they do is they say, okay, it has to fall within this acceptable range. And then if you're the first one to that, you win. So that's the lottery. And it just so happens, not just so happens, but that about every 10 minutes on average, some of these teams or one of these teams wins the lottery. Okay, but how are those rules enforced? Because with a lottery that we know and love, Minnesota State Lottery, there's a central party that conducts the lottery. It looks fairly determined by chance, but we don't know. Maybe there's a way to game it. I don't know. So you should have a concern. You probably have a concern. If you don't, let me plant that concern. You should be concerned about how are the rules enforced. It's pretty important. How do you decide which cars join the train? So if we think of that junction, where they offer up their cars. Think of it like there's a conductor there. What the conductor does is they check the specs of each to-be-added car. So a car shows up, and then the conductor looks at it, and they go, yep, checks out. You can jump on the train. Or they look at it and they go, nope, doesn't check out. Can't go on the train. Now let's rewind. I was talking about locks a while ago, and I said, what locks can't you fake? You can't fake a riddle. And if the riddle is a guessing game, the only way to win that game is to guess correctly. So what the conductor's doing in our train analogy is they don't have to take it on faith that, this is a pair of skis. They're looking at math. So if the math checks out, the car gets to be added. If the math doesn't check out, forget it. So what the conductor's doing is they are looking at math. So they can verify it. If anything's off, rejected. Now, what kind of mathy things are we talking about? So when a car comes up to be added, it's got to have a number of specs. There's got to be some information that goes with it. And here's some examples of things. So there has to be an ID for the car, showing its index in the list. So if we have, we'll keep it simple, 60 cars on the train, we're trying to add the 61st car. So we're going to say, we're offering the 61st car. If it's anything else, it's going to be rejected. There's going to be a summary of the cargo. It's going to say, in this analogy, it kind of breaks down a little bit, but let's pretend it's like the weight of the cargo or something like that. There's going to be an ID for the previous car, and this is dynamically generated. Let this wash over you. I'm going to summarize it really quick. So this is dynamically generated, so it's unique for every car. So in other words, you have to respond to the car that's just in front of you. And there's a timestamp. So you're looking to add it. When are you adding it? In the car analogy. Here's the big takeaway. The information that the teams have to include is dynamic. It's changing. And it depends upon what came before it. So long and short of it, they have to respond in the moment. And remember, it's also a guessing game. They're racing against the other miners. They have to respond in the moment to dynamic information and dependent information that depends upon what came before it. And then that depends upon what came before it. And that depends upon what came before it. So the long and short of it is the miners have to respond in the moment. And that's why you can't rig the game. We're going to draw out a little bit more on this in a moment. The only way you can kind of attempt to rig the game is by having a lot of mining teams working together, but there's even a solution for that. So, said otherwise, for those of you who are maybe more mathematically inclined, this is what, in effect, the miners have to do. They have to throw some stuff into a function, and that, what it spits out, has to be in an acceptable range. If it's not, back to the drawing board. Okay. Got that? Excellent. Now, you won't be able to read all this. Don't worry about it. You can look at the notes later, and I have handout materials you can take with. But there's two things I want to point out, maybe three things. So on the left side, here's the train. On the right side, here's the corresponding item in Bitcoin. So let's look at two of these in particular, though. So first is the conductor. So in the train analogy, I've just got one conductor. They're the rule enforcer, the arbiter, the verifier. In Bitcoin, and if we look back, how many rule enforcers are there? There's as many rule enforcers as there are nodes. So whereas the train has one, Bitcoin has as many as there are nodes. There's only one train in the train analogy as well. To keep it simple. And the way we know trains, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. With Bitcoin, it's one ledger. It's a copy, though, present in every node on the network. So think of it as one ledger. You can think of it as a copy that's independently generated of the same ledger. But in Bitcoin, there's many, whereas in the train analogy, there's only one. So who enforces the rules? In the train analogy, it's just one party for ease of analogy. For Bitcoin, it's every single node. Every participant in the network has a copy of the record, and they verify every transaction and every block of transactions. Okay. Now this is, want to make sure this one sinks in, because the train analogy obviously has imperfections to it. Bitcoin is not a train. If it is, and nobody else thought of this analogy before me, then shame on them. So there's some ways this analogy breaks down. So let's just be clear that what's going on here. Okay, so when the transactions are initially shared, they can be a little bit helter-skelter. What do I mean? If you have, we'll just use a simple, or maybe a more simple analogy that we can wrap our heads around. If I'm on one side of the world and somebody else is on the other side of the world, and we both perform the same transaction, so, or rather, a transaction that points to the same money. So let's pretend Sam and I are in cahoots. And I send a transaction from address A, send X amount to address B. And at the same time, Sam says from address A, send X amount to address C. Which transaction do we build on? So the transactions are near instantaneous, so it's not a really big issue, but there is a possibility that there could be some chicanery. So enter the blockchain. We need to sort out which one's the legit transaction, Sam's or mine. And so what happens is, whichever car that includes that transaction gets added, okay, that's the one we're going with. So maybe it's Sam's, maybe it's mine. Key takeaway. The ordering that happens with the mining, so putting the transactions in order, that is the record. That's the thing that you hang your hat on. Maybe that's why I'm wearing a hat. That is the, if you have any money in address A, it means that that's already indicated on the record. What's changing on the record? When I propose a change, the new address. So think of it like this. Any money that exists is on the blockchain, and as time goes on, or the train, as time goes on, those transactions become effectively more and more irreversible, exponentially so. So that was how do blocks get added to the train. We're coming to the end, folks. Thank you, by the way, for your attention. So what's this look like for the user? We're gonna look under the hood so you can kind of feel a little bit more secure, but if anymore you're just like, head against the wall, that's cool. It's pretty simple to use. We just want to know what's going on under the hood. Okay. So you as a user say something like this. From address A, send X amount to address B. That's all you really worry about as you're filling it out in your software. Boom, click send. Pretty simple. Let's peek into our fellow's head here. So you've got an address anyone can send to. That's the way Bitcoin works. Anyone can send to your address if they know that it exists, which they do. But effectively, only you can move what's sent to it. I'll say that again. You have an address. Call it address A. Anyone can send to that address. By all means, if you want to send money to me, I'll give you an address. You can send it to me. But effectively, only I can move what's in it. Now, how do you do that? Where do these addresses come from? How do you make this transaction? I want to know how the sausage is made. Okay. So we'll enter into the mind of our fellow here. Well, I picked an atom in the known universe. Let's pretend that each atom has an ID. That one, and that one, and that one. Obviously, they're all going to have different IDs. It's going to be a huge ID. Probably going to be numeric, because I'm not going to be like Dave, Dave 2, Dave 3, Dave Johnson. So I picked an atom in the known universe. If anyone wants to send transaction, they want to send money, they need to know which atom I chose. So Bitcoin constructs this thing where you have to know a very absurdly complex number that would be prohibitively difficult to guess, that cannot be fabricated. So that's why we're using that analogy of the atoms in the universe. The odds of any two people choosing the same atom is practically, snug up to impossible as we can get. So, effectively, for you to receive a transaction, what's going on is funds are locked up that only you can unlock. So anybody can send to you, only you can control where it goes. To send from that address, you only need to prove that you have the way to unlock the lock. So to send, you just go, here's my address. Anybody can send to it. Sorry, to receive. To receive, you just say, this is the address. I'll take anybody. To send out of that address, I need to prove that I have the key. It's only by doing that, and we're going to use that analogy. The key is a really big number. You got to guess that really big number. So this is called asymmetrical security. Big word. All it means for our purposes, it's very simple to check because it's math, but it's very hard to break or fake. Now what's really going on under the hood? Because obviously I'm not picking an atom, I'm not calling up Susie Q and saying from address A, send X amount to address B. So what's really going on underneath the surface? So let's revisit security, because it's not, spoiler warning, it's not actually guessing atoms. So we're going to take a brief detour to talk about locks and hopefully put some flesh to this, and then we're practically there. So the locks we know. So the locks we're familiar with, one key both locks and unlocks. Probably, nowadays I guess there are, keypads, but I grew up, strangely enough, kind of with the Depression era mindset in a lot of ways, like rotary phone. We had to turn the dial on our TV using pliers. So we definitely had the one key that opened and locked. So the locks and unlocks, that's the keys that we know. Now obviously, then you're only as secure as whoever holds your key, and only as secure as the lock. You can hopefully see there's a problem, number of problems, which is, well, if I want to prove I can get into my lock, I have to present my key. And anybody who has my key can unlock my lock. That wouldn't work in a large system. So one key in the locks we know, both locks and unlocks. Should be clear that this is not how Bitcoin works. It's not that there's one key that both locks and unlocks. What do we need? We need it so that whoever we want can lock up funds to us. So they can be think of it like a safety deposit box. They can just slip something in. And again, I'll take money from anybody. Whoever we want can lock up funds that only we can use. But we need to make it that only we can unlock those funds. So I'm going to let this hang for a second. What do you need in order to do that? You need two keys. You need one key that anybody can use to lock. But you need a key that only you can use to unlock. So this is where we come back to this idea of plugging absurdly big numbers into a function and getting an acceptable answer. And we're going to unpack this for a moment, or in a moment, because there's really cool. This is, again, maybe I think I've mentioned two things I'm if you want, take a deeper dive in this. It's very fascinating. There's mathematical operations that are not reversible, or at least all the big minds in math say they aren't, and we haven't discovered a way to reverse them. So in other words, they're called trapdoor functions. And this isn't a trapdoor function, but it's like it. I'm not a big math guy, so don't worry if you're not big math people. You should still be able to follow me. Imagine I do a division, and I say, okay, we're going to do this division operation. X divided by such and such equals 3. Now this division operation, we'll see if this is shooting myself in the foot using this, but this division operation isn't just typical division, it's give me a remainder. So I'm saying x remainder division equals 3. Now, there's a ton of different answers that would work for that, but it's not just one answer. So there are some mathematical operations, if that didn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. There are some mathematical operations where there's not just one correct answer. There's several. But there's also mathematical operations where from the output, if all I gave you is the output, you could not know the input. What do we do with those? Use them in Bitcoin. This is what's behind cryptography, as it's used kind of across the industry beyond Bitcoin as well. So with these one-way functions, from an input, you're always going to get the same output. Plug in that input into that function, you're going to get the same output every time. Now let's pretend I give you the output, and I say, tell me what the input is. These are one-way functions. There's no going back. So how are you going to get the input if all you know is the output? And we've already talked about this. You're going to have to guess. 1, no. 2, no. 3, no. 4, no. And if it's a super big, it's potentially a super big number, that's very costly to do all that guessing, even with just gobs of supercomputers. So what are we really doing? Let's look under the hood. We're taking a potentially really large number. We're plugging it into a function that can't be reversed to get an address. So anybody can send it to that. Now to send from that address, what do we need to do? We need to unlock it. But if I unlocked it and I show you my key, then anybody can unlock funds in there. So that's no good. So the really neat thing that we can do is we can prove we have the input number without actually giving away the input number. And in that way, we open up what's in the address. So, like I said, you need 2 keys, private key that only you know, and a public key that anybody could have. And so what you do is take this super big number, it's your private key, plug it into one of these functions. That gets you the public key. Anybody can have that. Remember, it only goes one way. From the public key, plug it into another function, 2 technically, and that's how you get the address. Anybody can send to that address, but they can't know the public key unless you tell them, and they can't know the private key unless you tell them. So it's one way. The problem would be if you had to show your private key to open the address. So what happens? The private key produces a signature. You just think of this as proof that you can move what's in there. But you don't actually reveal the private key by signing. So in other words, you show proof that shows that only you, or at least it shows that you have that private key. That's good enough for us. You can now move what's in the address. We will now change on our ledger who has that, that balance right now. Don't lose the forest for the trees. As a user, it's as simple as your software is doing all the mechanics underneath the hood. From address A, send X amount to address B. Now, how are these transactions actually spread? Because I said you don't just go out into the street and yell, from address A, send X amount to address B. How does it happen? I think I've already hinted at this as well. Through gossip. So what happens is you make your transaction, and then, we'll call her Susie Q. Nice, that worked out great. So Susie Q is listening in over there, and you know what she says? From address A, send X amount to address B, sincerely, blah, blah, blah. She mimics exactly what you said. Unlike telephone, the mimicking doesn't really break down. Hey, come back. Okay, she repeats exactly what you said, and she tells her friends. And then all the people within earshot pick up their phones, and they say the same thing, blah, 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 blah. But you've done that proof thing where you prove that I'm the only one who has the key that opens this address. So she's aping exactly what you said, but it's not something she can fabricate because of that signature We're not going to go into the math there. Just know it's accessible if you want to learn more, but I don't want to break the macro narrative here. So she can repeat exactly what you said, and if she changes anything, it's going to invalidate that signature. So in other words, she has to copy it. If she tries to tweak something substantially, the transaction won't work. Everybody else can verify it. It's that asymmetrical security where they can go, that doesn't work out for the math. We're rejecting that. And careful, Susie Q, because if you're doing that enough, we're not going to talk with you anymore. So here are the corollaries again. Like I said, these slides will be available, so I don't want to just read a slide. But on the left, here's the train, and on the right, here's the corollary when it comes to Bitcoin. But don't forget, when riding a train, you don't have to know how it all works to know how to ride the train. And I'm not talking about trains right now. So for Bitcoin, you don't have to know all the guts. You can learn them. To use it, you just need to have that software. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. Good job. We're just going to wrap up a few points. Now, what are Bitcoin's keys? I've mentioned this, but we're going to put a finer point on it. Okay. This is my creation. It is a series of 256 binary options. What do I mean? Each of these rectangles can be black or white. Okay. Now, all data can be expressed in numbers. And it's just, do you have the software that can make sense of that data? So think of it as, if I poke out a bunch of these, that's going to produce a different number as opposed to if I poke out any others. Think of it like this. If you have to guess the ones I poked out, and only I have it, how are you going to know if you got any one correct? It's going to look like this. You're going to say, hey, Kevin, the first one, is it white? And you know what I'm going to say? Nothing. Then you're going to say, second one, is it black? I'm going to say nothing. Third one, you're going to say, is it white? I'm going to say nothing. The long and short is, to know any of the choices I've made, it's not enough to get one of them correct. You have to get them all correct in the right order. So this would be like a super big number. And in order to guess it, it's not enough to know what any place, what any digit is. You have to get the whole number correct. If this is a super big number, forget about it, because it gets exponentially more difficult with each option you add. Here it's just one of 2. Here it's one of 4, one of 8, one of 16, and you hopefully know how math works. So we don't think in terms of big numbers. That's beyond our capacity. So I like to use this analogy. Imagine I say, go to New York City and find a particular person's eyelash. We'll pick on Susie Q again. It's Susie Q's eyelash. That's all you know. Good luck. It's going to be exceedingly complex. Is it impossible? Truly impossible? No. You're probably going to die before you do it. And not just because New York's going down the tube, but also because you're not going to have the funds. How are you going to? That's going to take a long time, and that's got a cost to it. So this is where I like to think, you can keep on guessing, but the Earth's going to freeze over before you win that guessing game, even if you've got gobs of supercomputers. So just think, arguably stronger than any like offering. Hey, that's white. Let's see what comes next. Oh, great. Nope, we're not going to do that one. So how do you get started? And now we get to just wrap up. So I'm not going to spend too much time on these because this is in take-home materials, and it'll be emailed to you as well. But if you're like, I want to learn more, or I want to acquire some, let's talk about that. Broad strokes. So what are you going to need if you want to do transactions? You're going to need a keychain, because you need to keep track of your keys. Keys are what lock and unlock. You're going to need some way to broadcast your transactions. If you're not running a node, then you need something that's going to run through a node to broadcast your transactions. And you're going to need a balance tracker. So you're going to need some way to track how much Bitcoin you have under your control, because maybe you have it in a bunch of different addresses. So you need a wallet. Now these aren't the wallets we know, because the wallets we know, my money's in the wallet. You have my wallet, Like if you take my wallet, you can pull and it's not a lot, so don't bother. You can pull the money out, you can probably pull out my credit cards too. Shouldn't put so much information out on the table here. But, so my money is in the wallet. But what Bitcoin wallets do is that's not where your money is. The money is in every single node on the network. So what the wallet does is it tracks for you what addresses you have the key to. So the money's not in the wallet. Another way to think of it, I can have 16 different wallets all tracking the same balance. That doesn't mean I just multiplied my holdings by 16. It's just they're looking at the same addresses that I have keys to. That's what a wallet does in Bitcoin. Unfortunately, that's the word that we use. So we use it. It's a wallet. Awesome. Not going to make any recommendations for wallets. If you have questions, though, we can talk about that. So where do you go next if you want to learn and or acquire? I'm a big believer in investing in knowledge and seeing where that takes you. So first thing I'd say is, with all this, proceed informed. I research things to a painful degree before I start to embark on anything. It's just partly being a seminarian and studying philosophy and going down to metaphysics. So I like to build on what I know for sure. Not saying you need to do that, but I would say proceed informed and be vigilant. Because obviously there's a lot of scammers and bad actors out there. And there's just a lot of nuance. Now, if you want to learn more about Bitcoin, I have materials that you can take away. I recommend the following things. Twitter. I joined Twitter for 2 reasons. Nope, just one reason, is there's a guy I really like to follow who I think is very funny. And I've never tweeted anything, actually, all the time I've had Twitter. But you can learn a lot. People just throw out information on Twitter. It's a fantastic education. So Twitter, read books, of course, or take a course. If you want books, here are 3 I recommend. Bitcoin Standard, this talks about, I think it makes a sound and or rigorous economic case for Bitcoin. This is really apropos for Christians, thank God for Bitcoin. This one is kind of a depressing read, to be honest, because what it basically talks about is the creation, corruption, and then at the end talks a little bit about the redemption of money. The long and short of it is money is awesome, but as we know, the love of money is the root of all evil, as Scripture says, and they really show you in gory detail, not necessarily, but they show you like, oh, when the money's bad, it really leads to a lot of bad things. And then if you want to understand the guts, this is a great book to start with, which you can get for free. Nice if you threw some shekels at the author. It's not my book. But you can get that one for free as well. And they're all short reads, accessible for the lay audience. Courses. Here are some you can look at, and I've included some parties here who are kind of on different sides of the issue or spectrum. So again, this will all be available. Key focus here is this one's free, but when you're using free, usually there's going to be a trade-off. It's a beast to study this one. So here are some courses if you want to learn more. They're either free or relatively cheap. This, and I'm particularly thinking of you, John, but I don't want to give you just a bunch of stuff to wade through. But if somebody is like, hey, I'm interested from a business perspective, either for clients or offering financial advice and so on and so forth, no, get back. So Michael Saylor of MicroStrategy, he's the CEO of this company, put together a playbook called Bitcoin for Corporations. And that talks about all the various details that you financial types and accountants would be interested in, taxes, donations, charity accounting, and so on. So that's available for free. Huh, cool. Now, if you want to acquire Bitcoin, key takeaway here, Bitcoin are all exchanged. So whenever a Bitcoin is mined, it's sent to that miner. It doesn't just like exist somewhere out in the ether. It's always going to be underneath a lock. So in order to get Bitcoin, unless you're an insanely great guesser, you're going to be exchanging with someone something for it. Here are some ways you can look into dipping your toes. So on the top, I'm just going to call these exposure ways. With these parties, you don't, I think, so I could be wrong, because I'm not always up on the current facts. But with these ones, if you buy Bitcoin, you don't actually control the Bitcoin. Because remember, who controls the Bitcoin? The person who has the keys. If you don't have the keys, you don't control the Bitcoin. So what they do is they custody it for you. So they'll be like, yeah, we'll get you some Bitcoin. Put some money here. We're going to say this guy's Bitcoin. These other ones, these are exchanges you can look to. And here's where you could actually acquire Bitcoin that you could then put under your own lock and key. So the key takeaway here is, especially if you don't have the key, then you're subject to somebody else having the key, and you could be subject to terms of service. And if you kind of go down that rabbit hole of how the banking system works, the money you give to the bank, you don't own anymore. You have a claim to it, but they own it. So on the top, this is where you can get some exposure if you don't want to really start worrying about all the keys and all that jazz. Or if you want to, go a little deeper, here are some exchanges. Coinbase is a publicly traded company, recently went public. These other ones are not, to my knowledge. So that's not an endorsement, just for your information. Or just exchange goods and services. And when you exchange Bitcoin, all that you have to do is say, from address A, send X amount to address B. Where do you get that address? You take a really big number. You plug it into a function. That only gets you the address. You can share it with anybody. That's the address. The address comes from that big number. So it's not tied to who you are unless you reveal that it's tied to who you are. So important takeaway here is, they say, oh, that should have faded, shucks. So if it's not your keys, they say in the space, not your Bitcoin. If you got the key, then you're the one who's controlling it. Finally, because I've tried to be agnostic when it comes to price, if you follow it, it's crazy. How do you approach it? Well, what a lot of parties recommend doing is just do dollar cost averaging. So you say, I want to invest X amount. I'm going to invest that X amount in like US dollars over a particular period of time. So, not an endorsement, just saying that's how a lot of parties approach it. And you've come to the end. I have more information if anybody wants it. We can talk, we can chat. I need to drink some water. But otherwise, that's it. Thank you so much for your attendance. A lot more information will be available. And then Roger has, I didn't print out enough for everybody, I don't think, but maybe at this point there is. But Roger has some take-home materials if you want. That just helps maybe review what we talked about and point you in a direction if you want to learn more. Thank you.
Hello everyone, this is your presenter, Kevin Gerns. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to our sponsors for the Bitcoin Is talk and event. Please give them your support if you're in need of any of their services. So first we have Cities Web Services, whose goal is to implement digital marketing strategies to get businesses new customers, keep existing ones, and increase revenue from both. They combine local experts in your community with a top-tier in-house production team to meet the dynamic challenges of maintaining a robust business presence online. So if you're looking for web design, search engine optimization, web hosting, content management, creation, things like that, look into citieswebservices.com. And also want to plug Straight Productions. Straight Productions is a full-service creative production company producing high-quality photo and web content for direct clients and marketing agencies throughout the United States. If your company needs photo or video assets captured, please contact them, as their expertise is in connecting clients with creative. And you can find them at straightproductions.com. And just also want to give a special thanks to Josh Zenner Productions for filming our evening's production. Thank you very much. Please give them your support.